There we go. And I'm going to pass it over to Gabe. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Paige. We're working out audio real quick. Okay. Thank you, Paige, and thank you all for attending. So yeah, I'm the FCE Information Manager, and I'm going to be covering Introduction to Data Management and Publication here at FCE. And so first, I'm going to give you all a overview of what I'm going to be talking about. First, we're going to be reviewing sharing of LTER network data, as well as the EDI data repository and how we access those data through the FCE data catalog. I'm also going to be covering best practices, including data and project management, formatting data, describing metadata, and then finally, I'm going to be covering preparing for publication with EDI's ezEML web tool. So sharing of LTER network data, it's been ongoing since the NSF first funded the LTER sites in 1980. It enables new science. It supports open science and reproducibility, including cross-site synthesis. And additionally, funders and journal publishers often require data sets in a recognized data repository. So sharing data in a public manner has been very important for the LTER network. And the LTER network has a data release policy that all LTER sites need to follow. And so basically the data and information derived from publicly funded research in the US LTER network, whether it's totally or partially from LTER funds from NSF, it must be made available in community accepted data repositories. So basically, if NSF is at least partially funding the data collection, it needs to be published in such a way, and with as few restrictions as possible on a non-discriminatory basis. And so in the LTER network, there's two types of data. There's type 1 data, where basically the data need to be published openly within 2 years of collection and no later than the publication of the main findings from the data set. There are also type 2 data, which are to be released to restricted audiences according to terms specified by owners of the data. Type 2 data are considered to be exceptional and should be rare in occurrence. These are things like people's personal information and sociology type data sets, or endangered species data. At FCE, we are publishing all new data sets openly, so we are publishing type 1 data for all new data sets. And there used to be more options in the past, but it's become a bit more rigorous in what can be published under type 2. And I can answer more questions if folks have any questions about that later on. And so for FCE LTER graduate student data, they must submit complete data and metadata information before graduation, and it needs to be submitted to me, and I need to be able to review it and give feedback, and it needs to be in a finalized state before graduation. So please do not wait until the last minute. Sometimes there's a number of iterations that we need to go through before those data and metadata are up to the expected requirements. And so next, a little bit more about the Environmental Data Initiative data repository. This is where FCE publishes our data. It's a community accepted data repository, and it's funded by the NSF. And some of the main points, it provides long-term data security, long-term data accessibility, data integrity, data discovery, and very important to y'all when you're submitting a manuscript, it provides citable digital object identifiers for your data sets. And EDI has a data portal that you can use to access all of the data sets that have been published there. And so far, they're up to more than 9,900 searchable unique data packages. And they provide an advanced search functionality. And then they also provide features where LTER sites can create their own data catalogs that filter their specific data to researchers. And so FCE has its own data catalog that it lists the FCE data sets that are published in EDI, And so it's easily searchable from the catalog on our FCE website. And so next is the steps to publish data in the EDI repository. And so this is basically once you are ready to go about getting your data published, you're going to want to review the FCE data page. You're going to want to contact me about your data, whether it's tabular, model code, imagery, or something else. You're also going to want to go over the required metadata with me, as well as how to format your data set for publication. And you'll also be getting an FCE dataset ID from me. And then after we go through that process, you'll be entering data and metadata into EDI's ezEML web tool. And then finally, we'll finish by reviewing the package and going through iterations of revision until it's ready to go, and then we publish it to the EDI repository. And next, we're getting into best practices in data management. And this kind of goes back to just when you're initially setting up your project, it's really important to be to carefully consider how you're setting up your folder structures, as well as a number of other things. And it ends up planning ahead really helps with not only getting the data published in an easy manner toward the end, but also working with your collaborators, working with your future self, making it so it's easy for a manuscript reviewer to understand the data and code that you've published and how to use them and how you came to your conclusions. And so one of the important parts of that is file organization. And so you want to use a logical folder structure. You also want to use consistent file names. You want to keep your raw data separate from analyses. You also want to keep the raw data in a raw data folder if possible, and then you might have revised data files. And so ideally you would put those in a revised data folder or something like that. And then you also use file versioning whenever possible. And file versioning can be something as simple as appending the current date to a file after you've modified it. And it can get as complex as using something like Git and GitHub. Next, you want to be backing up your data and follow something called the 3-2-1 rule. And basically, you want to have 3 copies of your data in 2 geographically separate locations. And you want to have more than one type of storage device. I just want to provide an example from this past November. The EDI data repository was hosted at the University of New Mexico's data center. And they ended up losing power at that data center after a severe blizzard knocked it out. And it was a few days before the power was restored. And so folks were not able to get data from the Environmental Data Initiative repository at the time. But FCE has copies of all the data that we publish in the EDI data repository. And so I was able to work with folks and get them data that they needed because we keep copies in multiple places. This would also apply to an individual's data, whether there's a potential risks for, say, your laptop if it gets stolen, or if there's a lab fire, all types of other potential risks. So it's good to have those 3 copies of the data, 2 geographically separate locations, and more than one type of storage device. You also want to write a living data management plan. And that could start off as something as simple as a README file that goes in your project main folder. And so basically you want to be documenting important details like the file organization structure and your storage, what your backup plan is, other details as they become involved with your project, whether it's what grant or permit you have involved. And initially this can all be relatively short, and you'll want to update it as the research project evolves. And the topics I've just covered, they're all covered in a publication by Briney et al. In 2020, Foundational Practices of Research Data Management. I recommend folks take a look at that if you get a chance. And also, they also published a research data management workbook in 2023 And that has a lot of great exercise to go through implementing the principles that they covered in the 2020 publication. Next, I want to get to something a little bit more specific with project management in RStudio. And there's a lot of benefits to, and this applies for anyone who is using R. RStudio is for anyone who's not familiar with it, it's an integrative development, an IDE. It's an integrative development environment. And so basically it allows you to run your scripts, plot your data, view all of that, as well as manage projects. And RStudio projects, there's a lot of benefits to them, but I want to focus on a few that I've noticed have become more and more important over time. And so one of the main benefits is automatically setting your working directory. And this makes your projects portable and collaborator friendly. And RStudio projects also support version control with Git and GitHub. And they can aid reproducibility with the rinse package. I won't be covering those last 2 points today, but getting the initial 3 points covered, which really comes down to automatically setting that working directory, gets you really set up for those last 2 points. And so this is just kind of the steps to go through to set up an RStudio project. And it's adapted from a data carpentry lesson linked at the bottom. But basically, you start RStudio and go through those steps, and you create your folders for your data with raw, intermediate, and final subfolders. Folder for your R scripts and a folder for figures. You could add other folders as needed. And so it would end up looking something like this. So this is a project working directory. And we have the RStudio project folder, file, the rproj file. And so basically what you would do for your project, you would navigate to it and you would open that .rproj file. And that would get you all set and ready to go to work in this working directory. We also would have a README text with instructions or information about this project. And then we would have the data, figures, and RScripts folders. And as I mentioned, within the data folder, we would have final, intermediate, and raw. So we would have our raw unchanged data, and intermediate, we might have either revised data that we've cleaned up or maybe intermediate calculations or outputs. And then finally, we would have final outputs that maybe would go into a manuscript or something like that. And so the portability aspect that I really just want to focus on is when you're reading data files into R or RStudio, you often either need to set your working directory explicitly in the R script, or you need to provide the full file path, which works fine if you're continuing to run your scripts from the same computer and you never need to move that folder where the data reside. And if you want to share it with a collaborator or move it to another computer, the script may break if your project folder is moved. And so with an RStudio project setup, that the path to your files is always going to be relative to the My Project folder. And so because of that, your project becomes portable, meaning I could zip up my RStudio project folder. I can send it to a collaborator via email or another way. They can open it on their end. They can run the scripts without needing to change the working directory or file paths. And so it kind of just makes it so it'll work right out of the box on their end. And so that really helps when not only you're working with a collaborator, but if someone is reviewing your code as you're getting ready to submit to a manuscript, you submit your manuscript to a journal, or if a reviewer is going through your code, it doesn't help if they have to change the working directory or multiple file paths that are being listed in the scripts. So this is just something that I really think is important to try and get the hang of early on, if at all possible. And if you're working In other programming languages, there's a lot of options to do something similar, whether it's Python or other languages. There's notebook programs that offer similar functionality. And then next, I want to get to formatting data. And so basically, the goal of that is to have one data type per column, and each variable is forming its own column. Each observation should form a row, and each cell should have a single measurement of that data type. And so some examples of what you don't want to be doing, and ideally how you would want your stuff to look. You want to have one rectangle of data with no blank columns or rows. You want to avoid blank cells if at all possible. You want to have one data type per column, one value per cell, and you want to use simple headers with no spaces and no special characters. Using special characters can cause a number of programs to read the data in incorrectly, or not read it in at all when data are being loaded for analysis. You also want to format dates in a standard way. We aim, whenever possible, to have a 4-digit year, 2-digit month, and 2-digit day separated by dashes. And you want to use consistent categorical variable codes. You'll see in the top example for stage. In one case, there's a number. In another case, it's the word 3 spelled out. And so that's another thing you want to avoid. And we want to avoid calculations or graphs, at least in the raw data files. Finally, we don't want to highlight cells or embed comments. Ideally, you would want to document anything you would use the highlighting for with a comment column. And anything that's unusual about a particular record, you want to put information in a comment column about it. And if you're revising a raw data file, you want to document any changes you make. So you might have that maybe in a README, or you might have that in a dedicated log file, listing all the changes that you made over time to various revisions. And you want to store metadata in a separate sheet or file. And you don't want to try and cram it all into a worksheet with your data. It makes it difficult to load it into programs, and it causes a number of other issues. And so what do I mean when I say metadata? It's basically data about data, and it documents the who, what, why, where, and when. And reasons why to use metadata: it helps keep track of important details about data. It's required to publish data sets, and it increases the findability and usability of published data, not only for potential future collaborators or folks who might be interested in reusing the data, but also you might find yourself going back to those data in the future. And it's really helpful to if you kept track of those important details, you don't have to go trying to figure out exactly why a particular value looks like this, or something is formatted this way or that way. And so there's a general list of common things that you want to document metadata-wise. And data set metadata should include data table information, also called a data dictionary, the title of your data set, a data set abstract, which differs from a manuscript abstract, parties responsible for the data set, methods, intellectual rights, keywords, geographic, temporal, and taxonomic coverage, information about non-tabular data, if applicable, project funding, and finally permits, if applicable. Often researchers are going out into the Everglades National Park, and so there's national park permits that are applicable to a lot of those data sets. And so just to give a little more detail about what a data dictionary can look like, it basically includes column names for a data table. And I'm focusing on this because most of the time the data that are submitted are tabular data. And so this is how you would want to try and cover all of the details about what are in the columns for your data tables. And so you would have your column name, the definition for the column, what type of variable goes in each column, units if applicable, the precision of the values you're measuring. Are they good to 1 decimal place, 2 decimal places, so on and so forth. Any codes that are used in categorical data columns, the date time format for columns that contain dates or times, and then for each column, what was the missing value code that would be used if you had a blank cell that you needed to fill with a missing value code, and a missing value code explanation to go along with that missing value code. And so this, I really, really encourage folks to create a data dictionary to go with their tabular data as early as possible. It's going to help you keep track of things. It's going to be really important as you're getting close to publishing or submitting your data for publication. Because a lot of this information will need to be entered into ezEML, and so if you already have it documented in a spreadsheet, you're going to be able to just fly through getting this part of the submission taken care of. And for the rest of submitting a data set, you're going to want to have a title that's descriptive, including the what, where, and when. And you do not want to use the manuscript title if there's an associated manuscript. The data set should be considered its own independent product. And so you want to describe the data set. And then the abstract should describe what, why, where, and when of the data set in more detail. You do not want to include results or conclusions from the study that you would include in your manuscript. You just want to describe those in your manuscript. Methods should be detailed to answer any questions someone might have. So if they come across your data set later on, and maybe they have a question about how a particular methodology was carried out, if you already included a citation for the protocol or a document that has the methodology that you followed, then they can go ahead and just look at that rather than needing to email you and ask for questions. You also want to include the list of cited references at the bottom of the methods. So you cite whatever protocol you might have used in the method's body, and then you would have a list of references at the bottom of the methods. And intellectual rights, FCE uses the Creative Commons CC BY license. Basically, it's an open license that allows for reuse of data and requires or expects attribution to the dataset creator when they're reused. Keywords, they should be sourced from the LTER controlled vocabulary when possible. And so you want to carefully choose keywords that help describe relevant terms to your data set that would help someone find the data set when they're searching. And geographic coverage should be included as decimal degrees for publishing. Temporal coverage should document when the data were collected, and it should follow that standard format with that 4-digit day, 2-digit month, 2-digit day. And if you don't have specific days or months, then you can do that just to the year, beginning year, end year, as a 4-digit year. Taxonomic coverage, ideally you want to cover any species that were involved in your data set. And so it's important to check the spelling of names for any that are present in your metadata. Information about non-tabular data entities should also be included. And so that can cover things like model code, geospatial data imagery, or other data entities. Project funding, so that should be information about what funded your data collection, and permits, which ones were required for the data collection. And so it's important, as I mentioned earlier, to get as much high quality metadata set up as early as possible. It'll be important for future you. It'll be important for that discovery and reuse of your published data. And the LTER network and EDI use the ecological metadata language to document high quality metadata. And those metadata are not only relevant at the beginning of your data set, but throughout the life cycle of your data set. And so, especially if it's an ongoing data set, you'll be continuing to add metadata or update metadata over time. And so it's a continuous cycle in a lot of cases. And so it's really important to get a strategy set up initially and then keep building on it over time. And finally, ezEML's role in data publishing in the data publishing lifecycle. ezEML is a form-based web interface from the Environmental Data Initiative. It's built to create and edit structured metadata in EML, and it can utilize pre-filled FCE templates, so that can help pre-fill things like our core research sites, as well as a number of other details such as funding. And it saves as you go. It allows you to quality check data and metadata, and it produces an end product that we call a data package, which is basically your data and metadata combined. And it can create metadata for tables and other data entities. And then for tabular metadata, it can go through and check whether the data are matching what is described in the metadata. And so it can give you some idea of issues you should look into, which are highlighted in with yellow flags. And those are warnings. And then there will be potential showstoppers that are highlighted in red. And so the errors really have to be dealt with. And it can also fetch existing packages from EDI to facilitate updates, which is really helpful for ongoing data packages that we have to update on an ongoing basis. We just pull the latest version in, we update the data, update any applicable metadata, and then we're good to load an updated version into the EDI repository. And then you can also preview how your data package will look on the EDI data portal through ezEML. And so this is just an example of how a water quality data package might look. And so that's really helpful because you can go in, edit some stuff in ezEML preview. Okay, you decide you don't like how a particular part looks, or maybe it needs to have some more information. You go back into ezEML, you make some edits, and then you can preview again until you're happy with how it's looking. And so I want to go back to the process of submitting your data to the FCEIM. First, you would want to review the FCE data page that has information on how you would want to format your data, among other things. You would then want to contact the FCEIM to review your data and to receive an FCE dataset ID. And then finally, you would accept an ezEML collaboration invite from the FCEIM. And you would then enter data and metadata into ezEML. Finally, you would go through the process of iteratively reviewing your data package with the FCEIM and finally publish it in the EDI data repository. And so I want to let you all know there's about the IM support at FCE. We have a section on IM support on the FCE data page. And contains IM support information along with a growing collection of links to resources on best practices in data management. And I host weekly office hours at MMC case 186B, also known as the Perry Fighton or Evelyn Geyser Lab. And so I host those office hours on Thursdays from 2 to 6:30 p.m. And then I also offer IM support at FCE student think tank events. I am also available by email or appointment in person or on Zoom. So if you have any questions about the data set you're working on, even if you're at the beginning of working on it, I'm happy to talk and discuss and provide guidance. So feel free to drop by or send me an email, and we can set something up. So these are the resources that I covered throughout my presentation, and I recommend folks check them out. And as well as there's a final link in here with Google Drive link to a folder that contains the presentation and example metadata documents. So that's my presentation. Questions and discussion. So I'm just looking at the comments, and I see Jed Redwine commented, our studio hosts and compiles R and Python code in the current version, and that is absolutely correct. Thank you very much for pointing that out. So Gareth Lagerwall asked, do data table checks include CSV files? They do. And actually, what we upload into ezEML is data tables need to be uploaded as CSV files, ideally. And so table check will go through. It'll check what's in each column of your data table against what you specified in the metadata, and it'll let you know what values or columns might need correcting. Any other questions?
Hey, Gabe. Great presentation. I do have a question. So I was wondering, especially for students, when we're getting ready to submit our papers for for review, now that publishing your papers is required, publishing your data is required. Do you have like a recommended time frame that we should be connecting with you before we're like trying to go and submit our manuscripts for review? Because usually on review applications, it asks if sometimes it even like asks for already like DOI like address for your data. So you have like a recommended time frame that students should like contact you for data?
Excellent question, Paige. So I would recommend contacting me as soon as you're starting to collect data and get it, or even beforehand if you would like. But ideally, at least as soon as you start collecting data, and so you can get it in that form that it's going to be easy to go through the process of getting it ready for publication, including not only how those data are formatted, but how you're describing everything in the metadata. And more and more journals are kind of expecting you to not only publish data, but also code to go along with those data. And the gold standard is often to publish the code in GitHub, which goes back to getting set up with our studio projects and working with your data and code in a organized project manner. And so, yeah, again, I recommend getting with me as soon as you're able to. It'll just make things really a lot more straightforward. Sometimes folks wait until the last minute and they have already submitted their manuscript and they're at the point where it's been accepted, and now they have to rush with getting their data set published, and so they have a DOI so they can include in the final form of the manuscript the proofs, and that can be very chaotic and challenging sometimes because they maybe a significant amount of metadata need to be added, or there's issues with the data files that are going to need to be tidied before they can be published. So yeah, as early as possible is my recommendation.
Thank you so much. And I have a follow-up question. So when you are when we're working with you, I know it kind of varies depending on the data set that you're working with, but how long does it usually take to go through the process from like when you first like start loading your data to ezEML to like actually having that final DOI publication of the metadata and data?
So it can vary significantly by based on what's being submitted. And in some cases, it's just a single data file. In other cases, data and code are being submitted. Um, I'd say I know of one case where someone emailed me on a Sunday evening. Please don't do this. They emailed me at, I think it was like 7 p.m. on a Sunday evening, and their manuscript had been accepted, um, and they needed to get a data set published with code as quickly as possible. I did send them an email a few hours later and set up the email document for them to start working on. And then I went to bed and woke up in the morning. I think I had gotten an email at 5 a.m. from them, and they had added everything. They said they had added everything to the ezEML document. So I was interested in seeing how we were doing with this submission. And in their case, they were extremely well organized, thankfully, with all of their metadata and everything. And so we were able to actually get that published within 24 hours. There's other cases where it can take weeks or even months, depending on various factors that are involved with time, communication, um, and also uh, needing to depend on outside parties to give feedback. So um, yes, again, please don't email me on a Sunday evening. Email me or come by for office hours or student think tanks as early in your project as possible, and that will really speed up the process of getting your data published at the end.
I have a question. You mentioned imagery. Would we, I guess that we'd be citing, like, for example, if we take an aerial image from the county, we'd somehow link to that in our metadata or in our methods. I don't know what exactly.
So Rosario, okay, so Rosario, who's in the room, she has a question about publishing imagery data. And so your question was if you were, say, using imagery data from the county in your project. So it could vary depending on how your project is set up and how you're using those data. But oftentimes, if you're reusing someone else's published imagery, um, as part of your project, then you might be including maybe a subset of that imagery in what you're uploading in your data package. And yeah, so in the methods, you would there's a way that you can cite the data provenance. Basically, okay, so portions of the data that I'm using, I actually got from this originally published package, and ezEML makes it easy to document those data provenance metadata. So that's an excellent question.
Do we have any more last minute questions for Gabe while he's still here? Well, we had a few comments in the chat just saying thank you so much. It was very helpful, that people learned a lot about ezEML. And Steve Overbauer says, my current self is frequently disappointed with my past self. These tips will really help avoid that situation. So thank you so much, Gabe, for this fantastic presentation. I put a link to Gabe's presentation in the chat. We're also going to be posting this presentation on the FCE website, so that will be available if you know folks that weren't able to attend. You can go back and look at this as well. And I think Gabe said in that link that it's a link to the presentation, and then you can access all of the links that he referenced in his presentation through that. So thank you all so much for attending, and I hope you all have a great rest of your day.
Thank you, Paige. Thank you all.